Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to start chapter 9, the making of regional cultures. One of the commonest way of describing people is in terms of the language they speak. When we refer to a person as a Tamil or an Oriya, this usually means that he or she speaks Tamil or Oriya, lives in Tamil Nadu or Orissa. We also tend to associate each region with distinctive kinds of food, clothes, poetry, dance, music, and painting. Sometimes we take these identities for granted and assume that they have existed from time immemorial. However, their frontiers separating regions have evolved over time and in fact are still changing. Also, what we understand as regional cultures today are often the products of complex processes of intermixing of local tradition with the idea from other parts of the subcontinent. So, the Tamil peoples are not like this from time immemorial. They evolved over time, and as we will see, some traditions appear specific to some regions, others seem to be similar across regions, and yet others derive from older practices in a particular area but take a new form in other region. The Cheras and the development of Malayalam. Let us begin by looking at the example of the connection between language and region. The Chera kingdom of Mahodayapuram was established in the 9th century in the southwestern part of the peninsula, part of present-day Kerala. It is likely the Malayalam was spoken in this area. The rulers introduced the Malayalam language and script in their inscriptions. In fact, this is one of the earliest examples of the use of regional language in official records in the subcontinent. So you can see here an early Kerala inscription composed in Malayalam. So you can see the inscription. At the same time, the Chera also drew upon Sanskritic traditions. The temple theatre of Kerala, which is traced to this period, borrowed stories from the Sanskrit epic. So the temple theatre borrowed stories from the Sanskrit epics. The first literary work in Malayalam dated to about the 12th century are directly indebted to Sanskrit. Interestingly enough, a 14th century text, the Leela Tilakam dealing with grammar and poetics, was composed in Manipravalam, literally diamonds and corals, referring to the two languages, Sanskrit and the regional language. Rulers and religious traditions, the Jagannatha cult. So you can see the figure 2, the iconic Balbhadra, Subhadra and Jagannatha palm leaf manuscript and of Orissa. So you can see Balbhadra, Subhadra and Lord Jagannath. In other regions, regional cultures grew around religious traditions. The best example of this process is the cult of Jagannatha, literally Lord of the World, a name of Lord Vishnu, at Puri, Orissa. To date, the local tribal people make the wooden image of the deity, which suggests that the deity was originally a local god who was later identified with Vishnu. In the 12th century, one of the most important rulers of the Ganga dynasty, Anantavarman, decided to erect a temple for Purushottama Jagannath at Puri. Subsequently, in 1230, King Ananta Bhima III decided his kingdom to the deity and proclaimed himself as the deputy of the god. As the temple gained its importance as a center of pilgrimage, its authority in social and political matters also increased. All those who conquered Orissa, such as the Mughals, the Marathas, and the English East India Company, attempted to gain control over the temple. They felt that this would make the rule acceptable to the local people. So you can see Jagannath temple. This is the flag of the Jagannath in the top of the, you can see here, a flag is hosted. The Rajputs and the traditions of heroism. In the 19th century, the region that constitutes most of present-day Rajasthan was called Rajputana by the British. While this may suggest that this was an area that was inhabited only or mainly by Rajputs, this is only partially true. There were and are several groups who identified themselves as Rajputs in many areas of northern and central India, and of course there are several peoples other than Rajputs who lived in Rajasthan. However, the Rajputs are often recognized as contributing the distinctive culture of Rajasthan. So Rajputs are often recognized as contributing the distinctive culture of Rajasthan. These cultural traditions were closely linked with the idea of aspirations of rulers. From about the 8th century, most of the present day state Rajasthan was ruled by various Rajput families. Prithviraj, you can see in chapter 2, was one such ruler. So you can see the picture of Raja Raj Singh of Bikaner in the side. So these rulers cherished the ideal of the hero who fought valiantly, often choosing death on the battlefield rather than face defeat. So they used to die rather than facing the defeat. Stories about Rajput heroes were recorded in poems and songs, which were recited by specially trained minstrels. These preserved the memories of heroes and were expected to inspire others to follow their examples. Ordinary people were also attracted by these stories, which often depicted dramatic situation and a range of strong emotions, loyalty, friendship, love, valor, anger, etc. Did women find a place within these stories? Sometimes they figure as the cause of conflicts. As men fought with one another to either win or protect women, women are also depicted as following their heroic husband in both the life and death. There are stories about the practice of sati or the immolation of widows on the funeral prey by their of their husbands. So you can see the region described in this chapter. So you can see which are highlighted in pink. It's very clear. So those who followed the heroic ideals often had to pay for it with their lives. So the women were giving their life after a husband's death by sitting on the burning prey of the funeral of their husband. Beyond regional frontiers, the story of Kathak. In heroic traditions, if heroic traditions can be found in different regions in different forms, the same is true for of dance. Let us look at the history of one dance form, Kathak. Now associated with several parts of North India, the term Kathak is derived from Katha, word used in Sanskrit and other languages for story. So Katha means story. You all know that. The Kathaks were originally a caste of storytellers in temples of North India who embellished their performances with gesture and songs. Kathak began evolving into a distinct mode of dance in the 15th and 16th centuries. With the spread of the Bhakti movement, the legends of Radha Krishna were enacted in folk plays called Ras Leela, which combined folk dance with the basic gesture of the Kathak storytellers. So, under the Mughal emperors and their nobles, Kathak was performed in the court, where it acquired its present features and developed into a form of dance with a distinctive style. Subsequently, it developed in two traditions or gharanas, one in the courts of Rajasthan, Jaipur, and the other in the Lucknow under the patronage of Wajid Ali Shah, the last Nawab of Awadh. It grew into a major art form. By the third quarter of the 19th century, it was firmly entrenched as dance form not only in these two regions but in the adjoining areas of present-day Punjab, Haryana, Jammu Kashmir, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh. So here is a dance class in the figure of Lakshmana temple of Khajuraho. So you can see the picture. Emphasis was laid on intricate and rapid footwork, elaborate costumes, as well as on the enactment of stories. Kathak, like several other cultural practices, was viewed with disfavor by most British administrators in the 19th and 20th centuries. However, it survived and continued to be performed by courtesans and was recognized as one of 6 classical forms of dance in the country after independence. So you can see the classical dances. The question of defining any form as classical is quite complicated. Do we define something as classical if it dealt with religious theme, or do we consider it classical because it appears to require a great deal of skill acquired through long years of training? Or is it classical because it is performed according to the rules that are laid down and variations are not encouraged? These are questions we need to think about. It is worth remembering that many dance forms that are classified as folk also share several of the characteristics considered typical of classical form. So which are classified as folk also share several characteristics considered typical of classical forms. So while the use of the term classical may suggest that these forms are superior, this need not always be literally true. Other dance forms that are recognized as classical at present are Bharatanatyam from Tamil Nadu, Kathakali from Kerala, Odissi from Odisha, and Kuchipudi from Andhra Pradesh, and Manipuri from Manipur. So you can see in figure 6, Kathak dancers, a coat painting. So in a coat painting, the Kathak dancers are displayed in the figure 6. So what a beautiful picture. Painting for patrons, the tradition of miniatures. Another tradition that developed in different ways was that of miniature painting. Miniatures, as their very name suggests, are small sized painting, generally done in watercolor on cloth or paper. So miniature paintings were small sized paintings which were done by watercolor on cloth or paper. The earliest miniature was on palm leaf or wood. Some of the most beautiful of these found in Western India are used to illustrate Jaina texts. The Mughal Emperor Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan patronized highly skilled painters who primarily illustrated manuscripts containing historical account and poetry. These were generally painted in brilliant colors and portrayed court scenes, scenes of battle of or hunting, and other aspects of social life. They were often exchanged as different and were viewed only by an exclusive few, the emperor and his close associate. So you can see in figure 7 Akbar resting during a hunt, Mughal miniature painting. So you can see Akbar was resting during a hunt. With the decline of the Mughal Empire, many painters moved out of the court of the emerging regional states. You can see it in chapter 10. As a result, Mughal artistic tastes influenced the regional courts of the Deccan and the Rajput courts of Rajasthan. At the same time, they retained and developed their distinctive characteristic. Portraits of ruler and court scenes came to be painted. Following the Mughal example, beside themes from mythology and poetry were depicted at centers such as Mewar, Jodhpur, Bundi, Kota and Kishangarh. Another region that attracted miniature paintings was the Himalayan foothills around the modern-day state of Himachal Pradesh. By the late 17th century, this region has developed a bold and intense style of miniature painting called Basholi. The most popular text to be painted here was Bhanudatta's Rasa Manjari. Nadir Shah's invasion and the conquest of Delhi in 1739 resulted in the migration of Mughal artists to the hills to escape the uncertainties of the plains. So you can see in figure 8 Maharana Ram Singh II playing Holi Rajput miniature in Kota. So here Mr. Maharaja Ram Singh II is playing Holi with its subjects. So you can also see in figure 9 Lord Krishna and Srimati Radharani and her companions Pahari miniature Kangra. So in Kangra this miniature painting was painted. So you can see Lord Krishna sitting here and his companions Radharani and her companions are also sitting there. Here they found ready patterns which led to the founding of the Khangra school of painting. By the mid 18th century, the Khangra artists developed a style which breathed a new spirit into miniature painting. The source of inspiration was the Vaishnavite tradition. So their main source of inspiration was Vaishnavite tradition, soft colors including cool blue and green, and a lyrical treatment of theme distinguished Khangra painting. Remember, the ordinary women and men painted as well on pots, walls, floors, cloth, work on art that have occasionally survived, unlike the miniature that were carefully preserved in palaces for centuries. A closer look, Bengal, the growth of regional language. As we saw at the outset, we often tend to identify region in terms of the language spoken by the people. So we assume that people in Bengal always spoke Bengali. However, what is interesting is that while Bengali is now recognized as a language derived from Sanskrit, early Sanskrit text mid first millennium BCE says that the people of Bengal did not speak Sanskritic languages. How then did the new language emerge? From the 4th to 3rd century BC, commercial ties began to develop between Bengal and Magad, South Bihar, which may have led to the growing. So you can see here in the figure 10 a page from the palm leaf manuscript of the earliest Bengali Ramayana. So this is the manuscript of early Bengal Ramayana, which was written on a palm leaf. So they had their ties begin to develop, which may have led to the growing influence of Sanskrit. During the 4th century, the Gupta rulers established political control over North Bengal and began to settle Brahmanas in the area. Thus, the linguistic and cultural influence from the mid-Ganga valley became stronger. In the 7th century, the Chinese traveler Zhuangzhang observed that language related to Sanskrit were in use all over the Bengal. So he noticed that language related to Sanskrit was being spoken all over the Bengal. From the 8th century, Bengal became the center of regional kingdom under the Pala. You can see that in chapter 2. Between the 14th and 16th century, Bengal was ruled by sultans who were independent of the ruler in Delhi. As in chapter 3, in 1586, when Akbar conquered Bengal, it formed the nucleus of Bengal Suba. While Persian was the language of administration, Bengali developed as a regional language. In fact, by the 15th century, the Bengali group of dialect came to be united by a common literary language based on the spoken language of the western part of the region, now known as West Bengal. Thus, although Bengali is derived from Sanskrit, it passed through several stages of evolution. Also, a wide range of non-Sanskrit words derived from a variety of sources including tribal language, Persian and European languages have become part of the modern Bengali. Early Bengali literature may have been divided into two categories, one indebted to Sanskrit and the other independent of it. The first includes translation of Sanskrit epics, the Mangala Kavyas, literally auspicious poems dealing with the local deities, and Bhakti literature such as the biographies of Chaitanya Deva and the leader of the Vaishnava Bhakti movement, as you have seen in the chapter 8. The second includes Nath literature such as the songs of Mayanamati and Gopi Chandra, stories concerning the worship of Dharma Thakur, and fairy tales, folk tales and ballads. So Mayanamati, Gopi Chandra and Dharma Thakur, the Naths were ascetics who engaged in a variety of yogic practices. This particular song was which was often enacted described how Mayanamati, a queen, encouraged her son Gopi Chandra to adapt the path of asceticism in the face of variety of obstacles. Dharma Thakur is a popular regional deity often worshipped in the form of a stone or a piece of wood. The texts belonging to the first category are easier to date, as several manuscripts have been found indicating that they were composed between the late 15th and mid 18th century. So it was that they found that they were composed between 15th to mid 18th centuries. Those belonging to the second category circulated orally and cannot be precisely dated. They were particularly popular in eastern Bengal, where the influence of Brahmanas were relatively weak. And now the Pirs and temples. Pir means a Persian word meaning a spiritual guide. From the 16th century, people began to migrate in large number from the less fertile western Bengal to the forested and marshy areas of southeastern Bengal. As they moved eastward, they cleared forests and brought the land under rice cultivation. Gradually, local communities of fisher folks and shifting cultivators, often tribals, merged with the new communities of peasants. This coincided with the establishment of Mughal control over Bengal, with their capital in the heart of the eastern delta of Dhaka. Officials and functionaries received land and often set up mosques that served as centers for religious transformation in these areas. The early settlers sought some order and assurance in the unstable condition of the new settlement. These were provided by community leader, who also functioned as teacher and adjudicator, and were sometimes ascribed with supernatural powers. People refer to them with affection and respect as peers. The term including saints or Sufis and other religious personalities, daring colonizers and deified soldiers, various Hindus and Buddhist deities are even animistic spirits. Animism attributed of living soul to plants, inanimate objects and natural phenomena. The cult of Pir became very popular and their shrines can be found everywhere in Bengal. So the cult of Pir became very popular and their shrines were found all over the Bengal. Bengal also witnessed a temple building spree from the late 15th century which culminated in the 19th century. We have seen in chapter 2 and 5 that temple and other religious structures were often built by individual or group who were becoming powerful to both demonstrate their power and proclaim their piety. Many of the modest brick and terracotta temple in Bengal were built with the support of several low social groups such as the Kolu oil pressers and the Kansari bell metal workers. The coming of the European trading companies created a new economic opportunities. Many families belonging to these social groups availed of this as their social and economic positions were improved. So you can see this is a double roof thatched hut in figure 11 left one, and in figure 12 a four roofed temple with a tower. So you can see a tower with a four roofed a temple which is four roofed and has a tower. As the social and economic positions improved, they proclaimed their status through the construction of temples. When their local deity once worshipped in thatched huts in villages gained the recognition of the Brahmanas, their image began to be housed in temples. The temples began to copy the double roof dochala or four roofed chauchala structures of the thatched huts. Remember the Bangla Dome in chapter 5th? Yes, we have seen that. This led to the evolution of the typically Bengali style in temple architecture. So you can see in figure 13, Krishna with gopis, terracotta plaque from the Shyamaraya temple in Vishnupur. So this is a painting, terracotta block. So in the comparatively more complex four-roofed structure, four triangular roofs placed on the four walls move up to converge on a curved line or a point. So temples were usually built on a square platform. The interior was relatively plain, but the outer walls of many temples were decorated with paintings, ornamental tiles, and terracotta tablets. In some temples, particularly in Vishnupur of the Bankura district of West Bengal, such decoration reached a high degree of excellence. So it had very nice fish as food. Traditionally, food habits are generally based on locally available items of food. Bengal is a riverine plain which produces plenty of rice and fish. Understandably, these two items figure prominently in the menu of even poor Bengalis. Fishing has always been an important occupation, and Bengali literature contains several references to fish. What is more, terracotta plaques on the wall of temple and viharas, Buddhist monasteries, depict scenes of fish being dressed and taken to the market in basket. So here is a figure, fish being dressed for domestic consumption, terracotta plaque from the Vishalakshi temple, Arambagh. So Brahmanas were not allowed to eat non-vegetarian food, but the popularity of fish in the local diet made the Brahminical authorities relax this prohibition for the Bengal Brahmanas. The Brihadharma Purana, a 13th century Sanskrit text from Bengal, permits the local Brahmanas to eat certain varieties of fish. So the Brahmanas were eating fish in Bengal. Emergence of nation states in Europe. Till the 18th century, people in Europe saw themselves as subject of an empire, such as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or members of a church such as the Greek Orthodox Church. But from the late 18th century, people also began to identify themselves as members of a community that spoke a common language, such as French or German. By the early 19th century, in Romania, school textbooks began to write in Romanian rather than in Greek. And in Hungary, Hungarian was adapted as the official language instead of Latin. These and other similar developments created the consciousness among the people that each linguistic community was a separate nation. This feeling was strengthened by the movement for Italian and German unification in the late 19th century.